In this video lesson, I'm going to show you how to take a fairly average looking colour landscape and transform it into a much more moody and striking black and white conversion in Photoshop Elements. As you can see, our start file is fine as far as it goes, but it's already fairly monochromatic. There aren't many bright colours, and there are lots of blues and greens. And if there was a really nice rich red sunset, for example, you wouldn't want to convert it to black and white because it would be better as a colour original. But in this case, here's an image that I think really would suit converting to black and white. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a variety of different ways that you can do this in Elements, but I'm also going to show you the way that I think is the best for really taking control of how the various tones and colours in your original colour image are converted into black and white. Converting to black and white is simply a matter of removing any colour information. And there is a way of doing that in Elements. If you go up to Image, Mode, and then Grayscale in the drop-down menu here, click there. It asks you if you want to discard the colour information. Click OK. And there you have a very rough and ready black and white conversion. And actually, it doesn't look too bad. It's a bit flat, but that's really as far as that command goes. There's no way of controlling or tweaking the way the different colours are converted to black or to white, so it really is a bit limiting. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Ctrl Z just to go back to our colour original, and now we're going to have a look at converting to black and white using the dedicated convert to black and white command. So if we go up to Enhance, Convert to black and white, and you get a whole new dialogue popping up here. Just going to move that down a little bit. And you can see a before and after, and there are various presets in this Select a Star menu that give you a bit of a starting point, a bit of a helping hand in deciding how to convert your image. And you can go down through these. There's infrared, that looks quite moody and dramatic. Newspaper, definitely not going to work on this image, very washed out and overexposed. Portraits, scenic landscapes, that might work. Urban snapshots, again, a bit too bright and washed out. There's scenic landscapes again, and there's vivid landscapes. And as I do this, as I click on these, you'll see the sliders on the right here just moving around. And these sliders are basically dictating how the different colours, the red, green and blue channels in our original image are converted to black and white. And they're all subtly different. And there's also a contrast slider here, which you can use to drag it up and down to boost or decrease the contrast. But for my money, the whole thing is a bit rough and ready. Let's go to vivid landscapes, for example. We think that's not a bad conversion, but it's very hard to tell. The preview is very small, and we can adjust the sliders down here to tweak things, but they're very clunky. You only have to move them ever so slightly, and it creates quite a dramatic effect. And just moving them a bit further really blows things out or darkens things up slightly too much. And in order to really see the effect these sliders are having on your image, you have to click OK to open up the image, like so. And you may decide that's actually not what you want, but the only way to go back is to click Ctrl Z to undo and start again. So if I go back up to Enhance, Convert to black and white, and then we start the whole process again. So it's a bit fiddly and a bit clunky, and really not very satisfactory. And it's very hard to fine-tune these adjustments with any degree of control. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a much better way and a much cleverer way of deciding exactly how these colours are converted to black and white to really maximise the impact of your final image. So if I click on Cancel, and we can get started. Really take control of your black and white conversion is to use an adjustment layer. So if I click on the adjustment layer icon down here, you'll see a drop-down menu. Now you'll see that Elements doesn't have a black and white adjustment layer option. Photoshop CS does, and it's extremely easy to use and intuitive. But there's a way of cheating in Elements, and that's by going to Hue Saturation and creating a Hue Saturation adjustment layer. So there's our adjustment layer on top of our layer stack, and the way to convert to black and white initially is to make a very rough and ready conversion by dragging the saturation slider down to -100. That completely desaturates our image, so there's no colour information, or at least there appears to be no colour information, but those pixels are still there, and I can show you that, I can prove that by clicking on the master triangle here and then selecting any of these colours from the drop down menu. So we'll start with reds, click on reds, and then we're going to use this lightness slider here to adjust how the reds are converted to black and white in our image. So if I drag the lightness slider up to the right, you'll see it doesn't actually have much of an effect on our image. In fact, if you look at this area just here in the hills, as I drag the lightness slider up to the right, you'll see that just brightens up, and if I drag it down to the left, that just darkens. It's very subtle. There's obviously not very much red in our image, and just to bring out that little band of bushes and trees here, I'm actually going to drag the lightness down to -100 just so we can see it against the hillside. If I put it in the middle, you can't quite make it out, and I like the fact that it's a bit more contrasty by doing that. Now I can do the same with all of these different colours, and it gives me an idea of what the colours are that were in my original image, where they are, and how they're going to look in black and white. Here's the yellow slider. If I drag lightness up, you'll see the only yellows in the image are over in the right here on this sort of triangle, this reflected triangle. And again, I quite like the detail that brings out if I drag lightness all the way to +100. So I'm going to leave that there. These sliders are fairly subtle and nothing like as clunky as the sliders in the black and white conversion command. So dragging up to 100 won't unduly damage your image or create undue pixelation, particularly if it's a very high-res image in the first place. If I continue my conversion, I'm going to go to greens. Now you'd expect there to be more greens in our image, but again, there's not a great deal of green. Again, it's just over on the right there, and I'm probably tempted to drag that all the way to the right just to bring out that light area in our triangle down here. If we now go to cyans, here's where we start to see a few changes. There's definitely a few more cyans in our image, and this one is a bit more difficult to decide. If I go to the right, it just lightens up this middle area here. Just watch the middle area there as I do that. If I drag it to the left, it just darkens it up slightly and brings out those trees in the reflection. Now, again, I think I'm tempted to drag this to the left to darken those trees up. And that means dragging it to -100. Leave it there, and then I'm going to go to blues. And again, we can see where the blues are in our image just by dragging this slider back and forth. And you can see that blue really is the dominant colour in our original, as we suspected from looking at it. And again, I think just to boost the contrast and get nice punchy blacks, I'm actually going to drag blues all the way to the left to -100. And you can see, compared to +100, it just brings out detail in the clouds that are reflected down here. So if you have a look down here as I drag the slider to the right, you see that really loses that detail. And if I drag it to the left, it just really brings out this reflection nicely and brings out the dark shadows in the rocks. From playing with this image before, that there's very little magenta information in the image, so I'm just going to leave the magenta lightness at 0 and assess our initial conversion. It's actually looking pretty good, but we could do with it being a bit more punchy and having a bit more detail in the reflection here and perhaps some darker blacks in the shadows. And the way to do that is to create another adjustment layer. So if I click on this icon here, this time select levels from the drop down menu, and there you see our histogram, and it peters away just before it gets to the black end of the histogram, which suggests there aren't any really dark blacks in our image. And really, to make our image nice and punchy, that's what we want. And the way to decide just how far to slide this black slider is to hold down the Alt key, and as I slide it, you'll see it just goes white, and as I slide it across, you'll see patches start to appear, and these are areas that will print out as pure black. Now, we don't want to drag it too far, otherwise we'll have lots of areas in our image without any detail at all, just pure black areas. But if we drag it around to around about 9 or 10, like so, you can see those blacks just starting to appear, and we can turn this on and off just to see, and it just darkens up the black slightly and darkens up the whole image, makes it a bit more punchy. And the other thing we can do is to drag this slider here again just to darken things up slightly. This is the mid-tone slider, and we don't want to go too far to the right to darken things up, and we don't want to go too far to the left to wash things out. 1 is our default. I'm actually just going to drag it to around about 0.95, possibly 0.9, just to give it a bit more punch, like so. I can use the visibility icon here to compare before and after and see the effect my levels adjustment has had on my final image, and it's definitely an improvement. It's added a lot more impact and made the whole thing more punchy, but I still think we could do with bringing out a bit more detail in the reflection of the clouds down here and in the clouds themselves, make them a bit more moody and brooding on the horizon here. And to do that, I'm going to use the dodge and burn tools. But before I do that, I'm just going to create a new layer on top of our layer stack by merging our existing layers by pressing Shift, Control, Alt, E. It's a bit of a handful, but you can see that creates a new layer on top of our layer stack. I'm going to double click here to call that layer Burn. And the reason I'm creating a new layer is because if I'm making mistakes or if I go too far, I can just delete this layer and start again without worrying about affecting any of the other layers below. So I've made my burn layer on top. I can select the burn tool from the drop down menu over here. I'm going to select a nice soft edged brush from the presets like so, and I'm just going to drag the size up to around about 500, 600, something like that, and then I'm going to set range to mid-tones because it's the mid-tones in the sky that I just want to darken slightly, and I'm going to set my exposure to around about 10%. You want to be very, very subtle with the dodge and burn tools. In fact, 5% would probably be better because you just want to build things up gradually. It's very easy to overdo it and make it look too obvious. I'm going to select 10% just because it's a bit more obvious on screen so you can see what I'm doing. And once you've done that, you can just paint in these clouds, and you can see it just revealing a bit more detail, just darkening up the clouds and making them a bit more broody, like so. And I can now use this visibility icon because I've created this new layer. I can click on and off just to see the difference that's made. And it's quite subtle, but it definitely adds to the mood and atmosphere of our finished conversion. And I can do the same down here, again, probably keeping the range on the midtones. I can just paint in detail in this reflection just to bring out the reflection of the sky and these bright highlights. Maybe just darken the corners slightly in the foreground. You can see that's already an improvement. If I click on the visibility icon, you see it's just made things a little bit more intense and moody. Now I can do the same using the dodge tool. So if I make sure the top layer is selected again, press Shift, Control, Alt, E. That creates a new layer. I'll call this dodge. And I'm going to use the dodge tool just to brighten up some areas, like so. So select the dodge tool. Again, I'm going to need to reset my brush, a nice soft edged brush. Size again, maybe around about 450 this time, that's fine. Again, mid-tone selected, and I'm going to drag exposure again down to 10%, though 5%, as I say, is a bit more subtle and will give you a chance to build things up gradually. And I can use this perhaps to lighten some shadows here, just perhaps lighten. As you can see, it's actually fairly heavy-handed. Even at 10%, it's happening fairly quickly. So again, you might want to keep this subtle. I'm not going to labour the dodging because I don't think it actually needs that much, but I just wanted to show you how it worked. The burn layer, I can use the visibility icon up here to see the effect my dodging has had on my final conversion. Again, it's quite subtle, but it just gives you an idea of what we've done. And in fact, the fact that we've used layers for all of our adjustments means we can go back and see the effect each has had on our colour original. There's our colour source file. There's the hue saturation adjustment we made, tweaking how all the different colours were converted to black and white. And there's our levels adjustment, which just boosted the contrast and deepened the black slightly. And there's our burn and dodge layers. And the great thing about using adjustment layers is that we can go back and tweak them at any time, so long as we save our image as a PSD or a TIFF file. In this example, we'd need to turn off the dodge and the burn layers because they're sat on top, they're merged layers of all the layers below, just sat on top of our layer stack. And we could then double click on any of these to tweak them as we saw fit at a later date if we wanted to make any changes. Like so, but I'm going to leave that, as I say, at 0.9 and turn these back on. And there you have our finished black and white conversion with nice deep punchy blacks, nice bright whites, plenty of tonal range, and a much more striking image than our colour original.